Welcome to Conscious Conversations, a place where East meets West, a place where conversations and ideas will challenge your minds, expand your consciousness, awaken your heart, and make you think more deeply about yourself and the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Conscious Conversations. I'm Anthony Profeta, here once again with co-host Wes Gordon. How are you doing today, Wes?
Very good, very good.
You have a nice Easter?
Totally productive, yes.
Good. Very happy to hear that, and we hope all of you that were celebrating the Easter holiday as well, that you had a beautiful weekend also, and it was a blessed one for you and your family. If you were watching us last week, we were talking about, how we got here, and this whole idea from many traditions that, this place that we're in right now, or that we find ourselves in, really isn't our home. And so how did we get here? And there's many different traditions that say different things, but they all say, we're trying to actually sort of get out of this place and reunite ourselves once again with whatever you want to call that label of God, source, Buddha nature, clear light mind, pure light mind, universe, consciousness itself. And we touched a little bit and focused more heavily on the Western religions and the idea found in the first two chapters of the book of Genesis. And last week we said that it was probably going to be a two-part, right, because there's just so much that can really be found in just those simple two chapters alone. If you just read through them, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of depth there. But if you really read through them sort of methodically and carefully and really nitpick, like, what do they really mean by this or that? There is a great depth of teachings there. Now, whether you want to believe that these stories are real or not doesn't matter. The stories alone, whether they're real or whether they're a myth, they're still lessons and they're still truths that can be understood from them. And we spoke a little bit about how if you read those first two chapters, you actually find two different creation stories. And we touched upon how one seems to be, some scholars say, a more spiritual sort of creation, and the other is more of a physical sort of creation, because first they're created male and female. God created them, but then the second one goes, of the dust of the earth he formed them. Well, there was something else that can be brought to light, so to speak, about the first creation itself, and that is found in the first chapter, I should say. And it's the very first opening paragraph, where it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And then God said, let there be light. He saw the light, and it was good. Right. Now, some people just continue reading, no thought of that at all. But to a conscious reader, they see that statement, and then they read on the fourth day, God created the stars, the sun, the moon, and the lights of the universe. Exactly. So what is that light that God created first, that very first light that he saw and it was good? What is that? So do you have any ideas before I get into what some of the mystical interpretations
of that? I've made your assumptions on it. Because that possibly could be when he uttered that word and the light was created. He could have created Christ.
Oh, yes, the Christ light.
As the light.
The light of the world. Yeah. Yes. That's a very good interpretation. I have heard the light of the world is in reference to that, but I also have heard an interpretation, and we just throw these things out there for you all to contemplate and meditate upon and consider as well. We're not saying any of these are like the ultimate truth. As you dive into yourself, maybe you'll come to experience even different things of what that might mean for you. Right. But another interpretation of when God first said, let there be light, it was the awakening of consciousness. So the conscious light, the light of consciousness itself, was one of the first things to arise in the energy of space-time and, the universe. And so, very often when we talk about consciousness, or when we talk about coming to a realization of something, or seeing things correctly, we often use light as a reference. So we say like, oh, I've seen the light. Or we've become enlightened, we've become awake. And the word enlightenment just means the act of nurturing or cultivating light within. And the prefix means within, and light and men, the action of. So it's the action of cultivating light within ourselves. And so some people say that just becoming consciously aware, or cultivating and realizing our spiritual consciousness and that high level of like Christ consciousness, going back to what you're saying, the light, is that reference to let there be light, and why there is light, and he saw it was good,
Right.
prior to there being any lights in the sky, sun, stars, so on and so forth.
Exactly.
So that's just another little bit of interpretation that you can get just within that first paragraph.
Right. And since you pointed that out, I had a lot of, growing up in the church, they really get on you about the sexual stuff.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
So when you read that first chapter, he tells Adam and Eve, the male and female, to be fruitful and multiply.
He tells the animals the same thing.
Now, that to me implies you have to be getting busy with each other to be fruitful and multiply.
Right.
But yet I was taught in the church that their sin was somehow they had sex, and that's why they covered certain body parts
with the fig leaf, when they saw they were naked.
But if you reference that first verse before that,
right,
that doesn't hold water, but that's never really brought out to full extent.
No, this is a very, very interesting idea and interpretation that you're bringing to the forefront right now. And I don't believe many people even really know this. But the truth is that how the idea of the sin becoming lust and sexual, and that's what became the fall, and also the interpretation of how this snake or serpent becomes equated with the devil, actually comes out of apocryphal books. So these are books that are not included in the actual canon of Jewish scriptures or the Holy Bible itself. They're books that were written and are considered not sacred texts. And it's a very interesting one, because if you read through Genesis, you don't find any indication that this serpent or snake is a demonic figure.
Right.
You know, it just says that the serpent or the snake was more cunning of all the beasts of the field. So it's just talking about it's the most cunning of all the animals.
And created by God.
And created by God, and God knew it was there. I mean, why would you create a garden and you're all knowing, and you know that there's this thing here and it's going to destroy mankind, so why not help them? Why not get rid of it out of the garden? But right, so God created this thing, and this symbol of the snake is there. It's not a demonic figure. In fact, there is even a statement by Christ himself, who tells people to be like serpents to his disciples. When he sends them out into the world, he tells them, be as wise as serpents and innocent as doves. So how the idea of the devil became the snake, and how the idea that sin, or the sin, was lust and sexuality, actually goes back to the apocryphal book of the life of Adam and Eve, also known as the Apocalypse of Moses. Now, this was a book that was written during the Second Temple period, which was approximately a period of time from when the Jews were led out of exile of about 500 BC to 70 AD or CE, however you want to think of those, or you use those terms. But it consisted of the time from 500 years before Christ, BC, BCE, up to 70 years CE. They're not exactly sure when the book was written. They do believe it was in the earlier part of the BC, because it is referenced in early Jewish rabbis and ministers or preachers that were referencing that book at the time. However, the book was never included into any sacred canon. It was just a book that was known and was written. However, in that life of Adam and Eve, it goes into more detail of what happened in the fall. And during that time, it said that, and it talks more about Lucifer and Satan and how he fell from heaven. And the story, according to the book of Adam and Eve, is that Lucifer and all the angels, after God created man and woman, were told to bow down to man and woman. And the angel Satan, Lucifer, said that he would not bow down, that he would bow down to no one but God. He would bend no knee to anyone other than God. But God said, no, I'm asking you, and aren't you going to be obedient to me, to bow down to man and woman? And he says, no, I will not. And so he's cast out of heaven for that, and then becomes jealous of man and woman.
Ah,
So he enters the garden.
sneaky snake.
Snake, cunning, deceitful, deceiving, and enters the garden and begins to talk to Eve through the mouth of the serpent. So it portrays itself as the snake and begins to talk to Eve. Now, here's another interesting point. Why go to Eve? Why didn't he go to Adam if he wouldn't bow down to the man and woman? Well, if you read the Bible, Eve is never told, don't eat of the tree. She isn't even created at the time. The only one created at the time is Adam. And God tells Adam not to eat of the tree of good and evil. And then he takes Adam, puts him to sleep, and takes Eve out of him. And now Eve is here. Mm-hmm. God knows how long after he was told not to eat. So supposedly it's Adam's responsibility to tell Eve not to eat of this fruit. So do we know if he ever did? Who knows? But the serpent then goes to her and tempts her to eat. And then what happens is in the fruit, he puts the desire, the lustful desire for the man and woman, for each other in the temptation of eating that fruit. And so it becomes lust. So the interpretation that the sin is sexual, the sin is lust, and that the devil is the serpent actually becomes, it's not sacred knowledge. It's actually from an apocryphal book that now many people who say the Bible is the Word of God are believing a book that they don't even consider the Word of God as biblical truth and canon. But I think we need to take a quick break here, and we'll return back and talk more about this when we come back from these brief messages. Stay with us. Welcome back to Conscious Conversations. We're here and we're continuing our talk on the fall, creation, and some lessons that can actually be learned from simply the first 2 chapters of Genesis. And we got into a little bit of where this serpent and how it got brought over into correlated with the devil, and how lust and sex became sort of one of the reasons for the fall. However, it's not really interpreted that way mystically at all. And the fact that it was lust, as I said, comes from a book that many people don't even claim is a sacred text of the Bible at all. So why believe it if you don't believe it's an inspired word of God? So that's just some things to think about and question. But any more about this?
Yeah, what you pointed out, the serpent or Lucifer came in on the side and done a sneaky trick. Yeah. Because he disobeyed, bound down to man. And I see that the actual sin of Adam and Eve was disobedience. Yes. They were told to do, especially don't do this, and they disobeyed. So it wasn't the sex thing at all. It was disobedience, just like poor old Lucifer there. He did the same thing. So he gets kicked out of heaven. They get kicked out of the garden. Right. Like we're both starting from scratch here. Yeah, if I'm, misery loves company. If I'm down here, I'm bringing you with me. Apparently, yeah. That's what it looks like. It sounds like, yeah. But, that's an excellent point. Some people say that the fall itself is just a mythical story, that there's law to this universe and God has a law, and when we are we disobedient to that or don't follow that, there's a consequence that comes along with that. Plain and simple. Right. But there are some other mystical interpretations that say, well, the story is also trying to teach us certain things. It's trying to teach us certain qualities, characteristics, or aspects that make us feel separated from God. And one of them is pride. And you might have heard this statement, pride comes before the fall. Right. And so one of the reasons that, according to the story, they, this fall happened was they wanted to be like gods. So there was this movement of pride that, they wanted to be better. They wanted to be equal to God. They wanted to do that. And so pride was one of the things that we need to guard ourselves against if we want to, or overcome, if we want to reconnect and really feel God within our life. Right. Because, pride is some way thinking that we're somehow better than somebody else. And so we want to limit that. There should be a humbleness and a humility to the way we walk in our journey through this life. But another say it's just selfishness itself. So there was a selfish desire, a craving for something,
and that was all about, well, this is me, or, they saw the fruit and the fruit looked pleasing to the eyes. And so it's like a desire for the senses, not necessarily sexual, but just the pleasures of life. So what is pleasing to the eyes, what is pleasing to taste, touch, all of those sort of things. And the selfish desire to want that for oneself was one of the reasons for the fall. And so another lesson that some of the mystical interpretations say is that we need to overcome selfishness and become, more selfless. And it's the selfish desire for things that was one of the reasons for the fall as well. And so there's a couple of those sort of like qualities that we want to overcome within that practice. But some, again, just say it's the outright, exactly what you said, that disobedience to law is the reason for, this whole, where we find ourselves in now.
Right. And back to that serpent part where he says that after you've done this, you're going to be lower than any animal. You're going to be
walk on your belly.
Yeah, and you have to eat dust the rest of your days.
Right.
Well, that doesn't make sense. Logic. Snakes don't eat dirt, so there's some kind of metaphoric meaning to that. But when I read that, I was like, well, does that imply that this serpent was walking upright, or was more than above the ground?
Yeah, good question. Or had legs or something.
Yeah, because we always think of a snake as down on the ground from the start.
Right.
So when he said, now you have to be that, kind of what's the reverse of that? So that's kind of strange too.
Yeah, it is. And I don't really know why that goes in there. There's no real clear, teaching that I found on that of, before that snakes were walking on four legs,
right, exactly.
Or, walking upright like a human being.
One of the weird things that happened to me, and I've shared this with you in the past, was the snake is a serpent, which is a reptile.
Yes. Oh, excellent. Yes.
And it was brought to my attention that we have supposedly in psychology reptilian brain.
Yes.
So I'm trying to see, well, is that what happened? Something activated that part of us more than the God part.
Right.
And it was interfering with our connection, making us separate.
Right.
So I found that very strange.
That's a very interesting point that you're bringing up right now, because the reptilian part of the brain is the part of the brain that's associated with fight, flight, or freeze. It's where anger arises from. It's where fear arises from. And when they ate of the fruit that the snake told them to eat,
which is a reptile,
what happened? But they became fearful.
Yeah.
They hid themselves. I'm afraid. I'm ashamed. And so maybe it was the activation of that reptilian brain now, and that part coming into our consciousness, because they say we can operate from fear or love,
right?
And prior to eating, they saw oneness. They were in this spiritual level of consciousness, and now all of a sudden they're fearful and afraid and hiding. And so they fell into a level of fear, which would correlate to the reptilian part of the brain. So that's a really interesting point that you bring up right now.
Yeah, very bizarre.
There's another point, though, a great teaching that they say that comes along with this little fall and eating the apple also. And it's this sad human quality of blaming everything around us for our own actions. And not taking responsibility for oneself.
Yeah, Eve made me do it.
Yeah, right. So what happens is now they eat of this fruit, and some people, there is a sort of modern feminist interpretation that because this was written by a patriarchal society, they made women eat first, and that they are the downfall for all of these problems. But, and hey, to your point, I do believe it was written in a patriarchal society, but Adam was quite pathetic if you look at this also, because from this, it's not like they portrayed man in any great light either.
Right.
Because God says, why are you hiding? Who told you were naked? And Adam, right off the bat, doesn't man up, as they say today, but he says, the woman,
the woman you gave me, the woman you gave me.
So not only does he say it's her fault, but then he says to God, hey, it's your fault, God.
You gave me her.
You gave me her. So now not only is Adam disobedient, not only is he ashamed, not only is he afraid, but he rats Eve out, and he blames everything on God.
He's in denial.
And so Adam doesn't come across as any great figure either. You know, he comes off pretty pathetic if you really read this, because what it's really about is the snake didn't shove the apple in Eve's mouth.
Right.
She took of her own nature. And she didn't shove it into Adam's mouth or tie him down and say, you have to eat this. He took it of his own nature.
Yes.
And so what it is about becoming responsible for the choices we make in our life and not blaming other people, which is the human response.
Well, what most people don't realize, because they give the devil this supposed power, and then they say, if you don't believe in anything, that's the biggest trick he's ever pulled.
Yes.
In my interpretation and in my experience at this point, the only power the devil has ever had, if it even exists in any form, is temptation.
Right.
That's it.
Right.
You ignore it, it's done. It doesn't like grab you by your hair and pull you back and make you do something. No. It's merely a temptation moment, and if you shut it down, no power.
Correct.
Gone.
Right. Absolutely, which is why the great figures or whoever, when the devil figure appeared to it, as soon as they denied it or as soon as they, told it to go away or overcame it, it fled. It's gone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No power.
No power at all.
Right.
Things only have power when we give it to them.
Right.
And so, that is an excellent point. But yeah, another great teaching of that first two chapters is that we have to look at ourselves and be responsible for our own choices, words, thoughts, deeds, and all the actions that we do take in this life.
But now we have this super great upcoming event that you're going to tell us all about.
I do.
It's a wonderful time. I've been there. What was it, 2 years ago now?
2 years ago now. Yeah.
It was a great gathering. Like-minded people, good-hearted, great energy. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes, and we are talking about our sponsors, the Ancient Healings Conference that will be happening in Melbourne, Florida on July 10th and 11th. So please, we hope you'll join us. We hope you can be there. For tickets, just go to ancienthealingsconference.com and you can find out more about the speakers. And if you want to be a vendor or a speaker, you can also go there and find a phone number to call because they are looking for vendors still at this time. We thank you all for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you next week and hope that each and every one of your days is filled with an abundance of love, happiness, and peace. Bye-bye.